Now, Lucas, my man, how's it going?
Hello,
It's, it's good to see you.
I'm Lucas Smiraldo, a good friend of the one and only Lawrence Garrett, who is a force of an elemental force of nature, and he's allowed me to be in the same room with him for a short period of time. So I'm honored to be here. I work for the Office of Equity and Human Rights, and I'm also a lifelong artist and collaborative artist that I think really is interested in how art can address the essence of issues around race and justice and access, and get to collaborate with some incredible artists as a result of that being a deep interest for me. So, Lawrence, I read the questions, but is there any place that you want me to start in terms of a response? Frame for me what would be most useful for you?
For sure. Well, Lucas, first and foremost, I mean, you say all these amazing things about me. Is your goal to make a black guy blush? Is that what we're trying to accomplish today?
Oh, that would be
Is
the
that the win?
highlight of my day.
Is
That
that
would be
the
the
win?
highlight of my day. Are you
Is that the
kidding?
win?
And you in particular,
Is that the
are you
win?
kidding? That's a keeper. That'll keep me going the whole weekend.
All right. Well, it's possible. It's possible. So I actually, Lucas, I just want to start with just how are you processing what's been happening in the last, let's say, last year. Let's do 2020. You can go as far back as maybe 2016. I mean, there's so much that we can that are all interconnected when we are looking at really inequities, and we're looking at
Yeah.
racism, and we're looking at kind of systems of injustice and systemic oppression. Like we could pick any kind of spot and then kind of go from there. But I'm just curious in general, like, how are you processing?
You know, as you ask that question, the first thing that comes to mind, and I know it's been used a lot, but it just came to mind, is that moment where Morpheus is looking at Neo and saying, "Do you want the red pill or the blue pill?"
Yeah.
And I can't remember which of the pills takes you deeper into Alice in Wonderland and into the well, but
Red pill.
um, the red pill. But I think that I started to, whether consciously or not, take the red pill in 2016, with the advent of Trump's ascendance, and I think in the succeeding 8 years, I felt like history had a sequence to it, that there was progress, and there was even though we were going to be going through some hard times, that we were going to be moving forward in a kind of a sequential direction. And when I saw, not, I mean, what's important for me to frame is not about Trump per se, although, I can have some conversations with my wife that are very explicit, between us and others, but is about the depth, and the root of racism and of injustice that is at the very heart, the very organs of this nation. And losing my innocence around that kind of earlier belief system, and becoming amenable to things that I kind of resisted or didn't really investigate before. So I think that as bleak and as frustrated as I've felt, there's been a benefit in terms of perhaps penetrating more deeply into what the problem is and what the answer may look like. And it doesn't lend itself to easy or more kind of like acceptable conversations that tend to happen around diversity and inclusion, et cetera. And I think I'm deeply influenced most recently by Isabel Wilkerson, and her first book, The Warmth of Other Suns, was an amazing, sweeping story of racism and the Black migration north, which had a huge impact on me. But her second book is even more substantial, and the book is Caste. And when I take a look at her analysis and the United States versus India, more and more I'm beginning to see the intransigence of caste system in the United States, with race being the vehicle for that. And so, I grappled with the question you asked of how can we get white men more involved and what's that going to take. And there is a kind of like a standard hopeful answer, but then another one where I go deeper into, I take the red pill and go even deeper in terms of the questions. So I'm on the red pill right now. I can't get to the blue one. It's just harder to get back to that blue pill. And the red one tells me that as a white man, and whiteness in America has been deeply affiliated with the intransigence of caste, that it's very, very rigid. And even when Black people and people of color ascend financially into the upper atmosphere, so to speak, caste continues to revisit them. Isabel Wilkerson talked about Forrest Whitaker going to his favorite, or to a deli one night, and a worker there. He saw a big line, and so he decided to leave. And the worker blocked his way and began to search him. He looked, quote, suspicious. And even though the deli owner, after he heard from Forrest Whitaker, fired that employee and apologized, it left an indelible mark. And again, I think that this constant repetition around caste is playing out. So the question that you pose is, how do white males get involved in this and get engaged? And I don't have an easy answer, because as I take a look at the numerous white men that I've engaged with through my work with the Office of Equity and Human Rights, especially with Equity 101, I've met probably close to the entire workforce for general government over 3 years, up to about 3,000 employees. I can't say I remember all of them, or that everyone stands out, but I've met that entire range of white male attitudes over that period of time, from the more progressive to the very resistant and angry. And I don't have a really good answer of what it's going to take. But what I can say right now, as I'm being influenced by Isabel Wilkerson's book, is that if you took in India the Brahmin class of India and said, how can you get involved in the liberation of the Dalits, which are also referred to as the untouchables? Um, I think it is very difficult to make that full transition for most of us that have been affiliated with the upper caste in the United States, not only in our lifetimes, but for generations and generations. And so those that are more progressive and are open are still afraid of getting more deeply involved, I believe. Um, those who are resistant, or even worse, rageful about this conversation, are sitting on a hurricane of rage that even scares me when I tap into it. I mean, I grew up dealing with the simmering volcano that was my father's anger. And so I was constantly trying to sidestep that. And it wasn't as physical as it was emotional, but it was a form of implied abuse that I sidestepped. And the anger that I feel most usually from white males and a few white females, not as many, is palpable, and it's a scary thing to have to encounter. So that's one side of things. The other side are those people, those white men that are more progressive. But the question is, what is it going to take for us as white males to engage not only in a conversation, but in a process that will dismantle the myth of our superiority that we've been anchored to for since we were born and remember. And keeping in mind, and again, I'm evoking Isabel Wilkerson, if we look at caste as members of a theater caste, we get cast into these roles and we continue to perpetuate that which happened the generation before and the generation before and the generation before. The names change, but the process continues. Um, what we are talking about is the liberation of a whole group of human beings, the United States and India are like the most abject examples of how caste plays out in the world. Um, and so I wish that I had like a neat answer for you in response. I don't, um,
Can
other than to say that there are some things that I think cause white men, depending upon where they are on that scope, or that sequence, um, that range, to hesitate to join the fight or to join in this. Um, I think that there's a lot of shame and fear that's associated with what change might look like, and what that means about my either unconsciousness or ignoring all of the evidence in front of me, the implication that comes with that. Um, and I think that for many, many, many white males of any kind of professional standing here, there is a implicit understanding that we could lose our membership if we speak up too frequently. That whiteness is a construct, but there's also a trade-off. There's a bargain that comes with whiteness and with white maleness.
you tell us
And
more
if we
about that?
speak up, what's that?
Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah,
Just
I'm
more
I'm
about
I'm happy to.
yeah.
So let me give you an example. Um, Isabel Wilkerson again was bringing up an example about the pillars of caste in the United States, and talking about in like the 1600s, a long time ago, a white man that was coupled with a black woman, and how that was against the laws and the expectations of that time, and they basically whipped and tortured that man. And for a rare occurrence, they did that and allowed black people to watch it as well as white people. But the message that they were sending to everyone is, look what we will do to a white man that breaks these rules. Just think of what we're going to do to you. Um, and so if we look at that, if we look at that generationally, maybe the consequences are not always as violent and as dire, but they're for any person that wants to be accepted and embraced in this society and have a certain level of standing and the prospect of advancing, to step out against racism and to take action against it, comes at some cost to membership in most cases, in all of the advantages of whiteness. Um, I think that there is some fear amongst white men around annihilation. I know that's a big thing to say, but when we take a look at what white people, and particularly white men, have done to indigenous communities and to people from the African diaspora, African Americans that were enslaved Africans, um, these were systemic acts of annihilation. And I think that there may be deep in our DNA a fear that that kind of hostility will be turned against us if power is redistributed. The amazing thing to me, Lawrence, is that while I've encountered some very strong black anger in my life, I've never encountered that philosophy and that attitude in return. There's been an amazing amount of graciousness and interest in embracing humanity and embracing people for their values amongst the many black people that I've known, and other people of color. There's hope there, and it's probably the reason that I like being in those circles the most, because they feel to me the least inhumane and most connected to a greater goal. And alternately, I get to be more of who I am in those mixed groups than I often feel is safe within an all white scenario. So the thing that we greatest fear is not going to happen as white males. I believe, I can almost guarantee. I don't believe that's going to happen, but it's a fear that I think drives the kind of standing at best standing on the sideline, and at worst fighting for a myth, as we see in all of these violent protests against the legitimate counting of votes that are happening right now. this belief that we're going to somehow be annihilated, or going to be canceled out, and that we're not going to count. And it's not true. That's not what's going to happen when we see a really liberated society. Um,
You know what's
y-
interesting, Lucas? I just
yeah,
want to say, and I'm
please.
curious to get your thoughts on this. We both love to listen into different speakers, and I was thinking of Ibram Kendi, and I was thinking about in his book where he referenced historically when you look at how societies operate, he kind of fell on two premises. That there is one that it's about conquer, what is it, control and conquest, or conquer and conquest, and the other one is more about communal, collaborative societies. And what was really fascinating is that when he had talked about kind of the emergence or more the migration of the Europeans moving into throughout the world, there was a conquer and conquest type mentality. And you know, and it makes me think. I wonder if that plays out into kind of the fear that's in American society now, that like this is the only way we knew how to operate, and maybe not consciously but unconsciously it was about conquer and conquest, right?
Yeah,
So if power shifts, we don't really operate under a collective. You know, we don't
yeah,
operate under a collaborative understanding of things. We are actually, that's actually the antithesis of how we operate. And I'm curious, just
yeah.
with that in mind, you know, what do you say to that?
Well, I'm thinking about what whiteness means, and I think that whiteness has all kinds of. I mean, it's an invention, but it's an invention with very, very real consequences. But there is a trade-off in whiteness, and part of it is that I don't think that there's anything about my whiteness or my assignment of whiteness and all of therein privileges and aspects that speaks to my essence, that speaks to my indigenous essence. But it's a trade-off that the Irish, the Italians, the people that were late to the party, but that were given that conference of whiteness in exchange for shutting the fuck up and straightening up and staying within all of those rewards, which is really a caste kind of an invitation to join that ruling caste, that they get that. But what you lose, I think, is any sense of, and I think it's the reason that we struggle with what is white culture and whiteness. And yes, there's many aspects to how whiteness is expressed and what I'm familiar with and comfortable with as an example. Um, and I think that, but the other side of that we've traded off is our own indigenous sense of identity and self, which is not, even though I'm really separating those, whiteness is not a part of our indigenous essence. It's an assignment that we have been given and accepted in order to stay at the top of the hierarchy. And when when anybody begins, and maybe this is the beginning of the answer to your question, when any white individual begins to legitimately, not in some kind of like I'm going to look at a Native American ritual, but legitimately look at their indigenous interior, really look at that, um, they cannot, in my view, and I think I may even write a book about this eventually, they cannot separate that personal exploration in terms of their indigenous interior and ignore the collective story around what we've done to the indigenous interior, when it comes to Native Americans and the indigenous people, or people that lived in harmony and affiliation within different African cultures and governments and systems, that the two they're intertwined, and that exploration, that personal exploration, will necessarily come with a collective analysis and critical understanding of the harm that's been done and our role. And it's just a role, it's not the entire piece, but our role in restoring something that is much more beautiful and humane than what we've participated in for hundreds of years, if not even longer. I think right now that's my belief. But Lawrence, when I think about a woman that I worked with for over 30 years, her name's Harriet. Was my therapist until she had the gall to retire at 93, like about 3 months ago. Um, what I so valued about my sessions with Harriet over the phone, because we used to see each other live in Ohio, but when I moved to Washington, it started to become phone appointments, is the exhilaration that I felt about discovering aspects of myself and the conditioning I went through and all of the stuff that left me depressed and angry and lost. But liberating from that is, to me, was finding kind of my indigenous interior, which is an exhilarating experience. And it is not separate from my responsibility for committing to that, not only for myself, but for the liberation of others, and pulling on whatever empathetic muscles I have to understand other frames of reference. One of the things I talk about with my African American friends and others, and I can't even name this, all I know is that it exists, is that there is an indigenous African sensibility that is a part of Black people, that is not only affiliated with the United States, but is drawn from a deep historic and generational sense that's brought forward. And when we talk about the unwillingness to respond with the same kind of annihilation sentiments that we saw white Europeans offer, there's something about relationship to others, the stories that have been shared, the value of our relationship to nature, to animals, to some of the folk stories that have driven the value system of different African cultures, that is at play, is alive here, and is a part of the indigenous essence. I'm not speaking in generalities, but indigenous essence of Black people in this country that we as white people don't have access to. We have to find our own interior, our own essence. But if we continue to ignore all of this, it's not going to happen, or it's going to happen superficially. We're going to evoke universals. That book I'm writing, 365 Revolutions, is not just about um, um, offering platitudes, meditations and platitudes, but really naming real issues that have been happening in the interior of this country and within ourselves, and by naming them, inviting the potential for exploration and liberation. So that's what is excited me about that project, even though I wouldn't be able to have said that 4 years ago when I started writing that book. And it's what moves me forward. And to cause more embarrassment for you, I would say what I absolutely love and adore about you, my friend, is the way that you are able to operate in multiple landscapes with students and people, and not come from the kind of like the knee-jerk phrases and belief system, all of the polemics that we were steeped in, especially in diversity and training. You're coming from something that is fresh and authentic and is caring and is holding people accountable and making them think, but not assigning them to some kind of a rigid definition. And I feel like you, in your work, evoke a certain kind of indigenous exploration um, that is different from what I've seen in other more traditional diversity and equity and racial justice practices. And I could not replicate what you do, but I can appreciate it and live within it, live within that system, like the system where you had all those students in different chairs trying to find their way around each other. I mean, you've physicalized where power is centered, how it plays out. You didn't use the usual language of race and hierarchy, but that it played out, and you ask questions: who did we value, whose opinion did we accept, etc. And that kind of organic way that you invite people into process, I really think is the wave of the future. And it's the reason, one of the reasons that I really enjoy watching your mind work and your spirit, and why it really is nice to spend time with you.
Well, you almost got me to blush, dude. It did. I was
Damn,
close. I was
damn.
close.
I'm getting there.
No,
I
I
may
know.
may take a couple sessions.
Well, Lucas, I appreciate you answering those questions fluidly. I'm like, oh, you hit that one, you hit that one. What I'm taking away from this is that one of the things that I've wanted to move in the direction of helping those unpack and explore whiteness is to decenter whiteness. And
Yeah,
one of the ways of doing that I referenced was holding to ethnic roots more. So if you're Irish American or Scottish, but I actually like where you're going with it because you take it a step further into an indigenous interior. And
yeah.
so again, I appreciate it because that's one more level, that's one more layer of exploration. When you and because when I hear the word indigenous, I'm not just thinking native or first
Mm-mm.
to the land. I'm thinking of everything that surrounds that ecosystem, right?
Right.
So this is a person in land, this is a person in animals, and this is person and their understanding of faith and whatever that looks like all of those things are centered in indigenous thinking. And so I appreciate you just for even using those two words together as a deeper way of exploring identity.
I do a visioning with my minister, Center for Spiritual Living, every Friday or Thursday. We go to her house and we just do a, what is Spirit calling for me, from me right now, or I can't even remember how she phrases it, but there's a series of questions, and we just kind of stay open and open ourselves to what we see. And I've had the ability to travel overseas a couple of times. Once was backpacking through Europe and Israel, and secondly was at the after my wedding. I think it was a year later, traveling for a honeymoon to Italy and spending some time in Positano. But I've been doing this visioning now for 20 years or longer with Francis, and from the start, I keep seeing scenes and texture of the Mediterranean. I see the coasts, the sun, the stone. It used to be more egotistical, like serving myself. I was going to be a leader or something. My ego was driving it. Now it's not so much that; it's just a sense of this being a part of me. And I think that that is an example of connecting to an indigenous interior. I relate to both being Italian and Jewish, but it goes deeper than that. And sometimes I find people find their roots in ways that are legitimate. They're not appropriation; they're legitimate, but they're finding places and things that they're called to that are like their blood and bone.
Mm.
And I think that that's important. I have a dear friend who teaches West African dance, and she was criticized because her troupe, when it was functioning, which was years ago, included a Japanese American woman, a white woman, an African American. I mean, it was a really mixed group of women, and her more black nationalist friends would say, you should just be doing this for black people. This is ours. You shouldn't make this accessible to them. But her response was, I have to take the students and those who I'm mentoring who are really called to, it'll make the sacrifices, it'll do the work, and that are really called to it, and it's natural for them. And so I don't think that we can ever make an assumption about who's called to what and what's legitimate, but it's consistency over time and a willingness to own our own identity and to give homage to the culture, and not to just absorb it, take it, and call it ours, and never affiliate our identity and our choices. I think there's a complexity around that. I'm not sure if I'm being real clear there, but that's something else that's coming to me.
No, and then I got you. And then what I hear, what you're referencing again, we're now talking about interior, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah,
so, so,
absolutely.
so I'm hearing it through the lens of the interior,
Yep,
right?
right.
So thank you for that, Lucas. You're a poet, you're a singer, you're a man of many talents and gifts, and I would love to just open the floor for however way you want to conclude this conversation today. Um,
Hmm.
So I want to give you a moment on that, and I know that's not on the script, but you're good on the spot, and I would love whatever is authentically important to you to express and share right now. I'd love for you to end us this way.
This may be trite. It's not even really related to, but I want to not just like um, do the pretense of seriousness, but just whatever comes to me. And I wrote a piece for my wife years ago before she and I were ever a certain thing. And it was about the way that love comes to me, or the way I felt about her at unexpected times. It's called Train. I don't think I've got it all memorized anymore. I probably have portions of it, but the way that I would affiliate it with today's conversation is that when things come to us in a kind of a naturalistic way, when we open ourselves, let me even phrase it this way: when we open ourselves as white people to deeper wisdoms and deeper invitation, and we also interrogate ourselves so that we never get too comfortable with who we are and ignoring all of the injustices around us. When we do that, I think we give ourselves a chance to become fully human in a way that our society discourages. But in this case, this is just a piece that came to me for reasons I can't even explain, but I'll share the portions I remember. Love passes through me like a train, not fast, but timely at regular stops, and I think of her on schedule. I am suddenly alive with the thought of her face. My joy is subtle, like my foot on the platform before I step on, and I don't see her boarding the same train as much anymore, but my love is independent of her schedule.
Mm.
I don't need to make the train stop, it just does. I don't need to create my love. It's already rolling in, and when I'm thinking of her, I just know I'm going to get a window seat. I will pass by the square of her smile. I will look back into the sun of her face. I will see her in the rumbling distance. Um, and I'm not remembering all because I haven't recited it in a long time, but that's a little portion of
Okay,
it.
okay, Lucas. All
Yeah.
right, all right. Well,
Next time I'll be ready. I wasn't ready for a spoken word piece today. I
well,
hadn't,
I'll
I
try to
hadn't.
get you to blush, and
Yeah, there you
there we
go. Yeah,
go.
well, it's easy for me. You have a serious melanin advantage,
I
my
do.
friend.
I do.
Serious melanin advantage.
Oh man. Well, Lucas, I always appreciate our time together. I appreciate the work you're doing for the city. And if you don't mind, I know you had mentioned earlier Equity 101 class
Yeah.
you operate. Could you just share for those who are watching and listening a little bit about that? And that's how we'll.
Yeah, yeah. The intent when our city made a commitment to equity as driving principles moving forward is that how do we do that if we don't have a common context and a common language for it? So before I came on board, the Office of Equity and Human Rights was formed about a year and a half before I came on board, and I inherited the beginnings of Equity 101, which is a training that or professional development that's meant to invite everyone to become aware of issues around equity and the history of systemic racism in the country and the city and what we can do to change that. So there's a video that's a part of the curriculum, as well as a number of engagement activities and conversations. And I and my colleague Mia Navarro lead that now remotely. We used to do it live in different rooms, but now we're joined together, and we have other facilitators that work with us. And so we deliver 4 hours worth of material to invite every employee in the city to go through a journey of understanding the priority of equity and racial justice in our city, and thinking about what role they can play and must play in moving that forward. So it's creating a common language. Now, I'm not going to say kumbaya that everybody comes out of that and says that was great. In fact, there's a number of folks that have choice words to say about the workshop. But overall, we're changing the language and the culture um, and preparing ourselves collectively for the next step and the next iteration. What we couldn't say before 5 years ago is we had trouble with the word race. And then we were able to talk about equity, and then we were able to talk about racial justice. And now the dividing line is white supremacy. That's the no-no that is creating so much resistance. I don't know if we'll ever get to the word caste in the city, but that's going to be even a deeper conversation. But we're preparing people to name what the issues are for our city and in the country. And by naming it, it liberates us to begin thinking about what it's going to take for us to dismantle racism on a jurisdictional basis and begin to really live out what we say we're about.
Well, thank you, Lucas. And just for those, I will put in the chat Lucas's email address if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Those who are interested in learning more about training times and dates and things of that nature. You know, I mean, how cool is it to have a city that has an equity office, right? An office of equity.
Yeah.
Be able to have.
I wish they all did. I really do.
Yeah.
And not just a single equity officer, but an actual team that works together, because it's too hard to do this work as a single individual. You just get targeted too much. So, yeah.
Is it okay to share the video? Because you guys have put on.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And I want to give you a little framework with that too, which is that we collaborated with the Puyallup tribe of Indians in telling their story in their words, and they altered and changed the script to reflect their point of view. They approved images or the like. So what that meant was, rather than needing to be given permission every time we show the film, they just gave us blanket permission to make that video available. So it's called How We Got Here. And if you put in the search on YouTube, How We Got Here, A Reckoning, that will bring up the film as the first part of the search. It's a 52-minute film, and you can watch it any time that you like. The one thing I would say about the training is that we direct that training towards our employees, and we have invited other folks to participate every once in a while, like our sister cities members had a special training. So I can't necessarily invite non-employees to participate, although I still owe you an invitation in terms of getting you into one anytime that you're ready. But the film is something that is accessible at any time, day or night, that they could watch at their leisure.
Well, watch it, folks. And Lucas, thank you for your time, buddy. And
thank you, Lawrence.
Yeah, we'll hear a song or a poem next time. Again,
I wish I could have finished that poem, but I gotta rehearse it. You just got to give me the heads up so I can get ready next time.
You bet, man. All right, thanks.
All right, thanks for all you do, Lawrence.
I appreciate it. Later.